I'm a bit of an English lit nerd. So as it grew unseasonably cold earlier this week, I wondered, am I experiencing some kind of pathetic fallacy? Now that's when the weather in a play or a poem matches the mood of the story. After all, I had been meditating on the story of Stephen. The contrast between it and the feel-good narrative from last week was profound. Last week we heard how the followers of Jesus grew in number and found a way to treat each other like family, just as Jesus had taught them. But then this week we hear how Stephen, a deacon, known for his holiness and known for his love, was stoned to death. Though this is cast as a story of Christianity's first martyr, it's a chilling story. Now, as a whole, United Church folks, well, we prefer a feel-good narrative. We're feel-good narrative people. And so in the early days of the lockdown, well, quite a few poems and reflections landed in my email inbox. Many of you have seen at least one or two, because we've included some in RHUC Reflections. You know the ones I mean. The ones how, in the midst of the struggle we're in, well, the earth is breathing again, or people are helping each other. These bring me peace in the midst of our struggle, as if a hoped-for world is actually able to be born from the health crisis. And in a way, they're really quite biblical. In the prophetic tradition, they don't just name unjust patterns, but they offer the vision of a new world. One in which, if we echo the words of Rumi, we see God's light shining in another's eyes. As the light of love holding us together, even those who hurt us. It's the same light that Stephen saw in his final moments, enabling him to transcend fear and to transcend anger and to offer forgiveness as he died. It's what transforms the pain of the cross into the renewing promise of Easter. This gives me hope, and I need hope, because as we enter into the week 10 of our new normal, I feel a chill. Don't know about you. I feel that when I watch news alerts of anti-Chinese racism on the rise, even from celebrities, or I read about the growing risk of famine in the global south, even as food is thrown away here in North America. I despair that Rumi's vision of light, of a holy unity within our diversity, will never be within our grasp. Today is the International Day for the Elimination of Homophobia, Transphobia, Biphobia, which adds another layer, a reminder that while we've made leaps towards inclusion here, there are many places in the world where simply being yourself is a death sentence. And if we're honest, there's still prejudice here, even violence, especially if you're trans. Well, this brings me back to Acts, and I wonder, why was there such a violent reaction against Stephen? Well, the answer, I think, is found in his sermon. We skipped over it because it's pretty long. He connects the story of Exodus with Jesus. Now, admittedly, as he tells this tale, he also blames them for Jesus' death. So in that part, well, their anger is pretty understandable. But I'm also struck by the story of Exodus, how it is a story about liberation, yet the ex-slaves, who at first created an equitable society, later replaced it with a monarchy. Stephen points to this foreshadowing in Exodus when he refers to how they made an idol, effectively emulating their enslavers' religion. And we see this repeated in Acts. Their anger was roused by the accusation that Stephen was promoting a change to their customs, that he was speaking against their religious tradition. And if we're honest, I see some of the same thing going on now. Those clamoring to the end of a lockdown keep on saying, we need to get back to normal. Well, friends, normal is a really long way off. And even then, the disruption we're facing is changing what normal is going to feel like. Have you ever noticed how, as a people, well, we're really resistant to change, fearful even of it? We hold on to how we do things, even when it doesn't benefit most of us, especially when we begin to think globally. Historically, crises like the one we're facing, crises bring change. Scholars argue that the Black Death, which ravaged Europe for 5 years during the 14th century, it reshaped medieval society. It undercut church power and unraveled feudalism. But it took the peasant revolts of a century later to finally lay serfdom to rest. And the push of the Reformation, another century beyond that, finally brought the religious changes that were starting to take hold. If we look closer to our own time, the Great Depression brought economic and social reform, especially in the United States, through the New Deal. But it took 3 years of Hoover's unsuccessful, though tried and true, policies for the U.S. electorate to give Roosevelt a try. Even then, FDR was roundly opposed, especially by conservative politicians and business leaders alike. So why is this? Well, this is going to sound cheeky, but we've become habituated to the curve. Now, I don't mean the curve of infection, but I mean the graphic itself, a peak. 5,000 years ago, we began to shift from fairly equitable forms of governance and economics, a fairly flat way of being together, to what we now have as our status quo of hierarchical inequality. Ironically, our overall survival rate as a species is much better in more equitable societies. Hierarchical inequality doesn't really work for us. But by one theory, these hierarchical forms came to dominate because unequal access to resources creates instability, conflict, even violence. And to deal with this, societies push into newer territories. Well, our history of one empire rising up after another shows that to be true. And the consequence is our fairly normal, but roundly unsustainable situation for humans, as well as for the environment. The pandemic has revealed that for many, a return to normal is going to be a return to struggle, not out of it. So clearly we need to shift from our status quo. And despite the feelings of despair that can grab hold of me from time to time, I really believe we're shifting. It often feels like we're stuck even going backwards, but if we look across generations, we see how we have been slowly flattening the religious, economic, and political curve. We're getting there, and I don't think we're getting there on our own. I really believe the Spirit's been at work, pushing through our fear, bringing the renewal we need each time the chill of prejudice, patriarchy, and power takes hold again. One way I see this right now is the shift in who we're calling essential. Have you noticed this? We're finally speaking about the importance of janitors, long-term care aides, grocery clerks, cashiers, early childhood care workers, truckers, bus drivers, all the people that for so long we have overlooked and underpaid. That to me is as significant a move to flattening the curve of our hierarchical society as the supports for working families that came out of the Depression or the rise in wages that followed the plague. In the end, each crisis carries within it the promise of a more equitable, sustainable, and loving world. This is the vision that Jesus pointed us toward. This is what was emulated by Stephen, is realized every time we denounce racism, is given expression as gay and trans youth are themselves without fear of judgment, embodied as we pitch together and help each other out, incarnated as the earth breathes again. We may struggle, but in the Spirit's care, we're going to get there, as surely as streams stream toward the ocean, and as the winter's chill gives way to spring. May it be so.